You are listening to the Stop Binge Eating podcast with Kirsten Sarfty, episode number 122. Welcome to the Stop Binge Eating podcast. It's time for you to end your food obsession and begin feeling confident and in control around food. You are absolutely capable of eliminating binge eating from your life, and I'm going to show you how by giving you simple tools and insights that you can apply in your own life. I'm your host, Kirsten Sarfty. Now let's get to it. Hi, it's December, the last month of the year. How are you feeling? I'm feeling so good. I've accomplished a lot this year, even with all that's been going on in this good old 2020. And I'm so excited to see what 2021 is going to bring. I am going to help thousands of people to stop binge eating, whether it be through my podcast or in my groups. And I am so excited to have you be a part of it in whatever way you choose, which I hope is in my group, because then I get to help you directly and talk with you and help you have the most success. And by the way, I have something really awesome coming up that you're going to want to know about. So keep your ears and your eyes peeled. All right, on to today's topic, which is levels of pleasure. Have you ever thought about trying to not binge, trying to not eat at night for pleasure, trying to not eat for fun, and thought something like, nothing else is as pleasurable. Nothing else will be as good. I've had countless people say those words to me. I don't recall myself saying those words exactly like that. Maybe I did, but I do remember comparing binging and eating a lot of food to other options, and I'd choose binging. I've talked about this before on here about how I'd choose eating over making plans with friends and hanging out. It came down to my idea that eating the food would be more fun. It would be more enjoyable because I felt like I was in full control of the fun being had. It was just me. I got to choose the food I ate. I got to choose what TV show or movie I watched while I was doing it. So I knew I'd be choosing things that would make it the most fun. But if I involved someone else, it was uncertain. Maybe they'd be in a low mood, or the activity we choose wouldn't be fun, or we just wouldn't have anything to talk about. I had all kinds of ideas in my head about why that other person could possibly ruin the fun, while I fully believed that I wouldn't ruin my fun if it was just me. It was so ridiculous. As I was preparing for this podcast, I took a moment to think back in my adult life to times when I truly would have enjoyed myself more at home alone, not even with food, but just me. And I can only think of two friends of mine that may have happened with. And with one, it was only because sometimes she'd get kind of drunk and I wouldn't. And I didn't enjoy being around that. But that didn't always happen with her. And the other friend who I sometimes felt like zoned out and stopped paying attention to me when we hang out, and I'd feel like I was talking to a wall, which obviously wasn't fun. But besides those two, and those were not even always, it was just sometimes with them, the drinker, the spacer, I can't think of anything. I still keep telling myself I wouldn't enjoy myself as much with other people, that eating alone would be more pleasurable. But it wasn't. At least not the whole time, because here's the truth about it. Anticipating the eating was pleasurable. I enjoyed shopping for it and deciding what I was going to get. Starting eating was pleasurable. The food tasted really good most of the time. But as the eating continued and I felt fuller and fuller, the pleasure diminished. And I talked about this before in my episode about the pleasure cap, number 112, if you haven't listened to it yet. In my mind, that first part was extremely pleasurable. I enjoyed it so much. As I've shared on here before, one of my main thoughts about binging that kept me doing it was that it would be fun. And that first part really was fun for me. On a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being the most pleasurable and 0 being something I would never want to do, shopping for binge foods and eating all the deliciousness in the beginning of the binge was probably close to a 10. I loved it. And that's why I kept going back to it and thinking about it all the time. Of all the things in my life, eating those foods were probably, if not the most pleasurable, one of the most pleasurable. When I was having a great time with friends at parties, concerts, or whatever, that was for sure up there too. The best times definitely being at a 10. But other than that, I thought my life was kind of dull. I wasn't in a relationship. I didn't see my friends enough, which was obviously mostly because of my lack of reaching out. I didn't love my jobs during most of my binge years. I was constantly trying to lose weight. And even with my passion projects, like my dance show that I produced and choreographed, or my band that I was in, I put a lot of pressure on those projects to become sources of income and for them to grow. So they stopped being fun. Eating food was probably the most consistently pleasurable thing in my life. It was an easy go-to pleasure, and it was a 10 out of 10 in the beginning. But then what? I'm talking about the beginning a lot here, but what about the end? The end. We all know about the end. That's why you're listening to this podcast. The end is anything but pleasurable. The end is where the sick feeling, the lethargy, the sluggishness, the regret, the sadness, the guilt, the disappointment all come in. You started at a 10, now you're at a 0. The result of going for that 10 was a 0. Let's not deny either of these. That pleasure you get from the beginning of the binge is a 10. That pleasure you get after a binge is a 0. Stop telling yourself that this won't happen. Stop telling yourself that you can have that 10 the whole way through and that it won't end in a 0. You know that's not true. You've seen the truth over and over again. So tell yourself the truth. You can go for the 10, but it's going to start to decline if you don't stop before the decline gets too low and then you end up at a 0. You got to pick where you want to stop the pleasure at. Do you want to stop it when you're at a 0? At a 5? At an 8? What I recommend is that you end on a high note, not a low one. End on a high level of pleasure, not a low one. That means that you're not going to continue seeking more. You're going to have a reasonable amount of joy food. You're going to love it and stop eating before the pleasure dips too low. Now, let's look at what happens when you choose that 10 pleasure from food all the time. What happens to the level 5 pleasures? What happens to connecting with another person and having conversations that aren't super thrilling, but just enjoyable? What happens to going for a walk on a nice day? What happens to watching a good TV show or a movie? And what happens to your favorite hobby? All of that becomes not good enough. Like I've heard so many people say before, nothing is as pleasurable as eating food. And maybe that's true for you. Maybe connecting with another person, walking outside, watching a TV show or a movie, doing your hobby aren't as pleasurable and exciting as eating food. Maybe they're a 5 or a 7. Or maybe they are a 9 or a 10, but the setup isn't. So that lack of pleasure stops you. And what I mean by that is setting up time to talk with a person may require you to reach out to more than one person because people are busy, or the person you try to engage with isn't in the mood to engage. Those were always my concerns to stop me. Or let's say that your hobby is painting, setting up yourself to paint. So setting up your easel, your canvas, getting your paint together takes some time, and it may not be as pleasurable as the actual painting. And finding something good to watch may take some time, and you don't want to go through that. So it could end up being an amazing conversation, an amazing hobby session, an amazing movie you miss out on because you're not focusing on the pleasure you'd get from doing it. You're too focused on the pleasureless effort it would take to get there. But with food, it's all easy, and the setup itself can be very pleasurable. So you go for that. But all those things that aren't as pleasurable as food, the 5s, the 7s, the ones that have setups that are 3s that end up turning into 10s when you're doing them, those are not going to result in 0s. Those are going to be the steady ones, the ones that stay on that steady level. And after you're finished, the decline in pleasure is slow. Sure, you'll get back to neutral if you don't engage in something else that's highly pleasurable, but neutral is better than extremely negative and miserable. There's nothing wrong with having level 10s of pleasure. It can happen when you eat an amazing joy food, just a serving, maybe 2. It can happen when you're in love, when you have fantastic sex, when you hit a big goal at work, when you win something, when you're at your favorite band's concert. But what needs to be looked at is the net consequence. When all is said and done, where's the pleasure? Is it still there or slowly declining? Or did it plummet to a zero? Choose your pleasures wisely. Choose the ones that will be steady, not extreme. Think about the net consequence, which is the final overall consequence, like your paycheck after taxes, your net income. Now, what's going to be important here as you choose your pleasures is that you're not always going for the 10. I think when some of us are wanting pleasure, we're expecting it to always be a 10. And if it's not, then it's not good enough. There you are experiencing a 6. It's lovely, but you're not appreciating it. You're thinking about how eating would make it better. I know a lot of you do this with TV. You think TV by itself isn't good enough and it's only enjoyable if you're eating while watching. Now, if that's true, either you need to find better things to watch or stop watching TV. Why would you do something that's only enjoyable if you're eating while doing it? It makes no sense. But I'd question a lot of you on this, and you might see that you're just telling yourself TV alone isn't good enough, when it actually could be. Why do you really need to eat popcorn while watching a movie? Does it really make the movie better? To be honest, from my perspective, it actually takes away from the movie. You can't focus on both the food and the movie at the same time. Your attention is always on one or the other. So if you're focusing on the food, then you're not absorbing the movie. And if you're focusing on the movie, you're not experiencing the food. Our brains don't have the capability to focus on two things at once. If you feel like you can, like when you're multitasking, what's really happening is your brain keeps quickly jumping back and forth between the two things. This is why I don't eat when I'm watching things I really want to pay attention to. If I'm watching something while eating, I'm watching something that I've seen before or something that's an easy watch because I want to focus on what I'm eating and savor it. Anyway, I kind of went off on a tangent there. So back to pleasure levels. Your life isn't going to be full of level 10 pleasures all the time. And if you try to make it that way by binging every day, you're going to end up with a lot of zeros. And also, if you use food as your source of pleasure every day and you're getting that level 10 every day with just a single joy food, then something not so great could happen. You could lose your interest in the lower level pleasures. You're so caught up in having those 10s every day and you're not diversifying your pleasures, so you get used to the 10. So then the 5s and the 6s are unappealing to you. All you end up looking forward to is that 10 from the joy food every day. This is what happens to people who get hooked on alcohol and drugs. Connecting soberly with a friend or being outside, walking or relaxing on a warm day is nothing in comparison to what they experience when they're drunk or high. So they don't seek out those lower level pleasures. They just stick with that 10, even though their net consequence is going to be a 0 because they're only focusing on that 10 they'll get before they start coming down. Imagine what your life would be like day to day if you incorporated level 5 to 7 pleasures and once in a while sprinkled in a 9 or a 10. Those 9s and 10s wouldn't be your expectation for day to day. They'd be a bonus. I don't have joy foods and super fun times with friends, family, or my boyfriend every single day. Sometimes it's just chill. He and I have a nice conversation about our day. We connect, or I watch a TV show or a movie I really enjoy. And I also find a lot of enjoyment scrolling through Instagram because I've curated it, so most of what I see is funny memes and videos or really cute animals. And I find moderate pleasure in experimenting with cooking new recipes and playing games and listening to good music. There's so many things. And that's what my day-to-day pleasure time looks like. And it's great. And then once or twice a week, there's big fun. I'll eat really amazing joy food, just a serving or two. I'll spend time with friends or family and we'll have an amazing time. Or Mike and I will do something super fun. Life isn't meant to be all 9s and 10s. Moderate is good enough, but you have to let go of the idea that it's always got to be 9s and 10s if you want to believe that. Don't lose sight of your long-term pleasures, the ones that enhance your life and last longer, the ones that aren't super exciting, but that bring even a bit of joy into your life. Don't sacrifice your moderate pleasures by going for the extreme ones all the time. And just know that giving up binge eating and excessive overeating isn't you sacrificing your pleasure at all. It's making room for better pleasure, true pleasure that feels good before, during, and after. Pleasure that doesn't end in regret or feeling gross. Pleasure that gives you energy rather than depleting you. The long-term moderate pleasures are the ones that will enhance your relationship with yourself. So that's actually a good question to ask yourself. Will this pleasure enhance or hinder my relationship with myself? Diversify your pleasure. Choose mostly moderate with the higher level ones sprinkled in. Create a full life and one where you don't create results of negative net consequences. All levels of pleasure are great, so enjoy them all, but always make sure you're aware of how you're feeling so you know when the pleasure is decreasing and how fast. End on a high note. Do things that are going to leave you with continued pleasure even after you've finished. Think before choosing your pleasure. Have a wonderfully pleasurable week, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Stop Binge Eating podcast. If you like what you heard today and you want more, go to coachkir.com/free. That's COACHKIR.com/free to get some awesome free stuff to help you stop binge eating.